Lady Chatterley's lover, and my name is Morel Bernard. Continuation. I think my last words were that a dog barked and she knocked at the door, her heart beating in spite of herself. She heard the man come in lightly downstairs. He opened the door quickly and startled her. He looked uneasy himself, but instantly a laugh came on his face. "Lady Chatterley," he said, "will you come in?" His manner was so perfectly easy and good. She stepped over the threshold into the rather dreary little room. "I only called with a message from Sir Clifford," she said in a soft, rather breathless voice. The man was looking at her with his blue, all-seeing eyes of his, which made her turn her face aside a little. He thought her comely, almost beautiful, in her shyness, and he took command of the situation himself at once. "Would you care to sit down?" he asked, presuming she would not. The door stood open. "No, thanks. Sir Clifford wondered if you would—" and she delivered her message, looking unconsciously into his eyes again. And now his eyes looked warm and kind, particularly to a woman, wonderfully warm and kind and at ease. "Very good, your ladyship. I will see to it at once." Taking an order, his whole self had changed, glazed over with a sort of hardness and distance. Connie hesitated. She ought to go, but she looked round the clean, tidy, rather dreary little sitting room with something like dismay. "Do you live here quite alone?" she asked. "Quite alone, your ladyship. But your mother?" "She lives in her own cottage in the village." "With a child?" asked Connie. "Yes, with a child." And his plain, rather worn face took on an indefinable look of derision. It was a face that changed all the time. "Bacon?" "No," he said, seeing Connie stand at a loss. "My mother comes and cleans up for me on Saturdays. I do the rest myself." Again Connie looked at him. His eyes were smiling again, a little mockingly, but warm and blue, and somehow kind. She wondered at him. He was in trousers and flannel shirt and a grey tie, his hair soft and damp, his face rather pale and worn-looking. When the eyes ceased to laugh, they looked as if they had suffered a great deal, still without losing their warmth. But a pallor of isolation came over him. She was not really there for him. She wanted to say so many things, and she said nothing. Only she looked up at him again and remarked, "I hope I didn't disturb you." The faint smile of mockery narrowed his eyes. "Only combing my hair, if you don't mind. I'm sorry I hadn't a coat on, but then I had no idea who was knocking. Nobody knocks here, and the unexpected sounds ominous." He went in front of her, down the garden path, to hold the gate. In his shirt without the clumsy velveteen coat, she saw again how slender he was, thin, stooping a little. Yet, as she passed him, there was something young and bright in his fair hair and his quick eyes. He would be a man about 37 or 8. She plodded on into the wood, knowing he was looking after her. He upset her so much in spite of herself. And he, as he went indoors, was thinking, "She's nice. She's real. She's nicer than she knows." She wondered very much about him. He seemed so unlike a gamekeeper, so unlike a working man anyhow, although he had something in common with the local people, but also something very uncommon. The gamekeeper, Mellors, is a curious kind of person, she said to Clifford. He might almost be a gentleman. Might he? Said Clifford. I hadn't noticed. But isn't there something special about him? Connie insisted. I think he's quite a nice fellow, but I know very little about him. He only came out of the army last year, less than a year ago, from India, I rather think. Well, he may have picked up certain tricks out there. Perhaps he was an officer's servant and improved on his position. Some of the men were like that, but it does them no good. They have to fall back into their old places when they get home again. Connie gazed at Clifford contemplatively. She saw in him the peculiar, tight rebuff against any one of the lower classes who might be really climbing up, which she knew was characteristic of his breed. But don't you think there is something special about him? She asked. Frankly, no. Nothing I have noticed. He looked at her curiously, uneasily, half suspiciously, and she felt he wasn't telling her the real truth. He wasn't telling himself the real truth. That was it. He disliked any suggestion of a really exceptional human being. People must be more or less at his level or below it. Connie felt again the tightness, niggardliness of the men of her generation. They were so tight, so scared of life. When Connie went up to her bedroom, she did what she had not done for a long time. Took off all her clothes and looked at herself naked in the huge mirror. She did not know what she was looking for, or yet very definitely, yet she moved the lamp till it shone full on her. And she thought, as she had thought so often, what a frail, easily hurt, rather pathetic thing a human body is. Naked, somehow a little unfinished, incomplete. She had been supposed to have rather a good figure, but now she was out of fashion. A little too female. Not enough like an adolescent boy. She was not very tall, a bit Scottish and short, but she had a certain fluent, down-slipping grace that might have been beauty. Her skin was faintly tawny. Her limbs had a certain stillness. Her body should have had a full, down-slipping richness, but it lacked something. Instead of ripening its firm, down-running curves, her body was flattening and going a little harsh. It was as if it had not had enough sun and warmth. It was a little greyish and sapless. Disappointed of its real womanhood, it had not succeeded in becoming boyish and unsubstantial and transparent. Instead, it had gone opaque. Her breasts were rather small and drooping, pear-shaped, but they were unripe, a little bitter, without meaning hanging there. And her belly had lost the fresh, round gleam it had when she was young, in the days of her German boy who really loved her physically. Then it was young and expectant, with a real look of its own. Now it was going slack and a little flat, thinner, but with a slack thinness. Her thighs, too. They used to look so quick and glimpsy in their female roundness. Somehow they too were going flat, slack, meaningless. Her body was going meaningless, going dull and opaque. So much insignificant substance. It made her feel immensely depressed and hopeless. What hope was there? She was old at 27, with no gleam and sparkle in the flesh. Old through neglect and denial. Yes, denial. Fashionable women kept their bodies bright like delicate porcelain by external attention. There was nothing inside the porcelain, but she was not even as bright as that. The mental life. Suddenly she hated it with a rushing fury, the swindle. She looked in the other mirror's reflection at her back, her waist, her loins. She was getting thinner, but to her it was not becoming. The crumple of her waist at the back, as she bent back to look, was a little weary, and it used to be so gay-looking. And the longish slope of her haunches and her buttocks had lost its gleam and its sense of richness. Gone. Gone. Only the German boy had loved it, and he was 10 years dead, very nearly. How time went by. 10 years dead, and she was only 27. The healthy boy with his fresh, clumsy sensuality that she had then been so scornful of, where would she find it now? It was gone out of men. They had their pathetic 2-second spasm like Michael's, but no healthy human sexuality that warms the blood and freshens the whole being. Still, she thought, the most beautiful part of her was the long, sloping fall of the hunches from the socket of the back, and the slumberous, round stillness of the buttocks, like hillocks of sand. The Arabs say soft and downward slipping with a long slope. Here, the life still lingered hoping, but here too she was thinner and going on ripe, astringent. But the front of her body made her miserable. It was already beginning to slacken, with a slack sort of thinness, almost withered. Going old before it had ever really lived. She thought of the child she might somehow bear. Was she fit, anyhow? She slipped into her nightdress and went to bed, where she sobbed bitterly. And in her bitterness burned a cold indignation against Clifford and his writings and his talk, against all the men of his sort who defrauded a woman even of her own body. Unjust, unjust. The sense of deep physical injustice burned to her very soul. But in the morning, all the same, she was up at 7 and going downstairs to Clifford. She had to help him in all the intimate things, for he had no man, and refused a woman servant. The housekeeper's husband, who had known him as a boy, helped him, and did any heavy lifting, but Connie did the personal things, and she did them willingly. It was a demand on her, but she had wanted to do what she could. So she hardly ever went away from Rugby, and never for more than a day or two when Mrs. Betts, the housekeeper, tended to Clifford. He, as was inevitable, in the course of time, took all the service for granted. It was natural he should. And yet, deep inside her, a sense of injustice, of being defrauded, had begun to burn in Connie. The physical sense of injustice is a dangerous feeling. Once it is awakened, it must have outlet, or it eats away the one in whom it is aroused. Poor Clifford, he was not to blame. His was the greater misfortune. It was all part of the general catastrophe. And yet, was he not in a way to blame? This lack of warmth, this lack of the simple, warm physical contact, was he not to blame for that? He was never really warm, nor even kind, only thoughtful, considerate, in a well-bred, cold sort of way, but never warm as a man can be warm to a woman, as even Connie's father could be warm to her, with the warmth of a man who did himself well and intended to, but who still could comfort it woman with a bit of his masculine glow. But Clifford was not like that. His whole race was not like that. They were all inwardly hard and separate, and warmth to them was just bad taste. You had to get on without it and hold your own, which was all very well if you were of the same class and race. Then you could keep yourself cold and be very estimable and hold your own and enjoy the satisfaction of holding it. But if you were of another class and another race, it wouldn't do. There was no fun merely holding your own and feeling you belonged to the ruling class. What was the point? When even the smartest aristocrats had really nothing positive of their own to hold, and their rule was really a farce, not rule at all. What was the point? It was all cold nonsense. Lady Chatterley's Lover. Do join me for the next video of Lady Chatterley's Lover. You have been listening to Merle Bernard narrating Lady Chatterley's Lover. Listen to the next video. Listen to the next video. See you then. Bye-bye. Bye.